without further ado, I would like you to welcome Ben de Waal to the stage. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So, yeah, thanks for the introduction, Daniel. And like he mentioned there, I've been living on a Bitcoin standard for a while now. And I thought it's kind of good to introduce myself a bit deeper and introduce what I'm doing and how and why. I think those are kind of interesting questions. And it's probably worth first pointing out, everything I'm talking about is my personal story, my personal experience. And, the way that I live my life is not the same as the way somebody else lives their life. When you live in a different country, there are different things that apply to you. When you have a different family situation, maybe you're more or less free to move around. There's always so many differences between people that I can really only talk about myself. I can't talk about you and your situation, but hopefully I'm going to say some things which will be interesting for you, some things which will pique your interest, some things which will give you a better idea of what I'm doing, how I'm doing it, and why, and maybe you can apply some of that to yourself and to your own lives. So first, a bit of an introduction into exactly who I am. So my name is Ben de Waal. It's a Dutch surname. My father was born in Rotterdam in the Netherlands. My mother was born in Tasmania, the little island at the bottom of Australia. And I was born in the deep south of New Zealand. So you can kind of take your pick as to what my nationality or my background is. Interestingly enough, my mother remarried when I was 4, and that was to a man from England, from the south of England, Sussex. Also, the area of New Zealand I grew up in has a lot of Scottish influence, so I've got some ties to Scotland there. Basically, my point is I'm a citizen of the planet. I don't look at myself as belonging to any particular country. My accent gives me away as a New Zealander, I think, but beyond that, I view the world as my home, and I take that approach with my life in general. Nations are just this artificial construct, often built around cultures, but not always, often intersecting cultural lines, but not always. And sometimes there's one language for a culture or a nation, sometimes there's multiple, sometimes there's one language that goes across national borders. So, nations really aren't my thing. I was born in New Zealand, grew up there, studied a lot of different things when I was younger, but really the things that interested me most were non-conventional politics and computer science. So I actually also studied neuroscience for a while. I was looking at becoming a doctor and then decided against it and decided computer science was more my thing. Strangely enough, at one point I got bored and became a qualified and licensed private investigator in the state of New South Wales, Australia. So I'm a private investigator officially. I've never done it as a job, but actually I would say anti-spook. I've done a lot of different things, but politics and computer science really interested me a lot. When I was 5 years old and my stepfather had an old Apple II computer, which gives you an idea of how old I am if you've ever heard of the Apple II, had 16 kilobytes of RAM. And I was playing a game, and I asked my stepfather, why is it when I press this key, the little man runs left? And when I press that key, the little man runs right? How does the computer know? So he showed me the source code. He showed me where those letters, where those keys were programmed in, and I could change them. And I said to myself, hold on, does this mean that if I know how to tell the computer what to do, I can do anything? The computer lets me do anything if I know how to tell it. Then later I realized, actually, no, there are limitations. Computers are bound by the laws of the universe, things like time and energy. As I mentioned, I was also studying a lot of politics at the time and looking at different political systems and thinking, there's, when I was growing up, there's these kind of two big superpowers in the world. There's, the United States of America and there's the USSR. There's the ones who call themselves the bastion of freedom, and there's the ones who seem to be kind of just taking over all of their neighbors and kind of giving them shitty lives. But so that one doesn't look particularly good. The other one sounds like it's good, but maybe there's some problems there as well. And the more I looked into it, I realized basically all political systems are about authority and about control. So I became an anarchist. Anarchist doesn't mean I'm going to throw a Molotov cocktail through the local shop window because I feel like it. That's not what anarchism is about. Anarchism as a political theory is really about having bottom-up approaches to things. The idea of taking your life and figuring out how to do things locally and then collaborate with others and get agreement between people, coming to consensus on things. And then I discovered Bitcoin. I was interested in computer science. I was interested in anarchism as a political philosophy. Bitcoin spoke to me directly. I saw Bitcoin, actually, to be fair, I first discovered it in 2010. I downloaded it, I played with it, I think I mined 4 blocks, so 200 Bitcoin, and then I deleted it. And then I rediscovered it in 2011, and that was the point that I actually figured out what it is, and that's when it actually spoke to me. So, oops, these things happen. But, so, I've been a Bitcoiner for a long time. In 2011, also, my daughter was born. So she has a block height. That's nice. Then 2014, my son was born. So he has a block height. That's nice. How many people do you know who know their own block height? Because both of my kids do. It's quite nice. And at that point in 2014, I kind of said to myself, this Bitcoin thing that, it looks interesting, but I haven't been devoting as much attention to it as I perhaps should. So I started, talking to a lot more people in the Bitcoin space, started going to various small meetup type things. There weren't conferences like this back then. It was more a few people sitting in a room and somebody goes up the front and says a few things. I've met most of the big names you've probably heard of, Andreas Antonopoulos, people like that. I hung out with those guys. And I started doing what a lot of people call spend and replace. And I'm going to get to that on a later slide. I'm still on the very first slide of my presentation here. 2017, however, I stopped doing that and I started living on a Bitcoin standard. And that's what this presentation is about. So now you know who I am. Kind of a long introduction, but I think it was worth it. Now you know who I am. What does it mean to live on a Bitcoin standard? Why would I live on a Bitcoin standard? And how do I live on a Bitcoin standard? I think those are 3 pretty interesting questions, hopefully. The first one, what? What does it mean to live on a Bitcoin standard? By the way, just for the people at the back, the timer here isn't running, so I have no idea how long I've been talking or how long I need to be talking. But yeah, okay. What does it mean to live on a Bitcoin standard? It really means recognizing that Bitcoin is money. That itself brings up a lot of other questions. What does it mean to ask, or to say, I recognize that Bitcoin is money? So we need to ask, what is money? And that, I think most people here have probably heard that there are 3 standard things that money achieves. Money is a store of value, money is a medium of exchange, money is a unit of account. So living on a Bitcoin standard really just means I use Bitcoin as my store of value, I use it as my medium of exchange, and actually I do use it as my unit of account. I would say for other people that's perhaps optional. Again, it depends on your own personal living situation, but I do. So what does it mean to talk about store of value? Wow, that graphic's really hard to see on this screen. I probably should have made it brighter. Oh well. What does it mean to talk about the store of value? Well, for those of you who saw my talk yesterday, I talked a lot more about value. I'm going to talk a little bit less about it today. But a store of value, we have to ask, what does store mean and what does value mean? Let's dig down a little bit. So value, as I mentioned in my talk yesterday about intrinsic value, is simply things that you value, things that you consider worthy, things that you desire, things that you want. And it's a subjective thing. It's inside your own head. But when we're talking about money, it's not just we're talking about what you desire. We're talking about intersubjective value, so the value between people. Money isn't really money if I'm the only person who's interested in it. If I all of a sudden said that, blue squares are money. Look, there's 9 blue squares here. I have 9 of my special kind of money. Does anyone want to sell me something for my money? It's absolutely pointless. I'm the only person who thinks that it's money. So it's not money. Money is only money when it's intersubjective value. Value that is agreed between people. But what does it mean to really say that a value can be intersubjective? Here we start looking at things like other ways of measuring things. So if you and I disagree on how large a centimeter is, then it's very difficult to talk about how far away something is. Because when I say that thing is 20 meters away from me, or that other city is 1,000 kilometers from here, what does that mean if we disagree on the distance? So money is an intersubjective value in that we should agree on the value of that money. We don't always agree on its value in relation to other things, and that's how trade happens. I want to buy a bottle of water. You want money from me. I will give you the money. You give me the bottle of water, and it's because I valued the water more and you valued the money more. So basic trade. So that's intersubjective value. What does it mean to store value? You don't store centimeters. So it's kind of a weird thing there. But storing value really just means ensuring that the centimeter that you have now is the same as the centimeter you have later. So a store of value is something whereby I take it in, I keep it, and it's not going to change significantly, or perhaps even change at all, in relation to the thing that it is measuring. And that's something a lot of people misunderstand about Bitcoin. They say Bitcoin goes up in value. I would say it goes up in relative value compared to everything else, but Bitcoin's value stays the same. One Bitcoin is always 1/21 millionth of the total supply of Bitcoin. Always. It doesn't become more, it doesn't become less. You can measure the exact amount that one Bitcoin is, and it doesn't change. So, storing value is often, of course, about storing value over time. And that's the important thing. What I want to be able to do when I store value is come back to it later and have the same value that I had before. So, okay, I think that's enough on store of value. What about a medium of exchange? So, if money is a medium of exchange, that means that we have this intersubjective agreement of value, and we are willing to exchange it with each other, so we can do so. The ability for me to send you some Bitcoin is what enables it as a medium of exchange. If I were to walk into some small store somewhere in Sofia, somewhere in the city here, and just pick something off of the shelf and then say, I'd like to pay for this with Bitcoin, they would probably tell me no. They'd probably tell me, no, we don't accept Bitcoin. I know there are a few which do, which is great, but they'd probably tell me I can't, which means with them, Bitcoin is not a medium of exchange. Bitcoin is a medium of exchange with plenty of other people. If you said, hey Ben, I want to hire you, by the way, that's my consulting company list up there, Bitcoiner Consulting. If you wanted to hire me for a consulting job, I would say, yes, you can, and in fact, you should pay me in Bitcoin. In fact, if you try to pay me with anything else, I'll charge you a currency surcharge. I don't take other things without a fee. So that's a medium of exchange. Medium of exchanges have two aspects of exchange. Exchanging over a distance is the first one. So it's very easy for me to walk up to you and hand you a piece of paper. It's very easy for me to walk up to you and hand you a piece of gold. It's very easy for me to walk up to you and you show me a QR code on your phone and I scan it and send you some Bitcoin. But what about at a bigger distance? I have family in New Zealand. If I wanted to send them some fiat money, I've got a couple of different options. I could do it peer-to-peer, by taking some cash, stuffing it in an envelope, and sending it in the postal system. It's going to take a long time, it'll have costs associated with it, and it's not very secure. It has some risks. I could do it via a middleman who's going to be able to see what I'm doing, going to be able to stop what I'm doing, be able to charge me fees. So fiat at a distance, it's not great. Gold at a distance, even worse. It's basically the same as the stuff it in an envelope, except it's heavier, chunkier. I recently read that a large amount of gold was sent from Canada to somewhere in Eastern Europe to get the money back to where it belonged, and there were trucks driving through Germany full of gold, and nobody knew about it until afterwards because, of course, they didn't want to tell anyone. That would be stupid. And you just think about the risks involved with sending large amounts of gold somewhere. It's insane. So that's medium of exchange over a distance. Bitcoin obviously is trivial to use as a medium of exchange over a distance. Just as I can walk up to you and you show me a QR code, you can send me a Lightning invoice from anywhere. You can send me an on-chain address from anywhere, and I can just send you money, peer to peer. Medium of exchange, however, you also need to think about it over time. So, I want to be able to send money into the future. What does send money into the future really mean? It just means the same thing as storing value over time. I need to be able to have some money and make sure that somebody at some point in the future, such as my children, get it and know that it has the same value, same relative value to the system itself that it had before. Third, property of money, and then I'll get on to the more interesting stuff, I promise. Third property of money is unit of account. So a unit of account simply means it's the thing that you are using as the measuring stick. Just like I talked about centimeters, as a unit of distance, you've got decibels for sound, you've got liters for liquid. You've got all of these different measurement sticks. And to use something as a unit of account in monetary terms simply means something like, if I take on a new client, a business client, I will charge them 1 million sats per hour. I use Bitcoin as my unit of account. I charge people directly in sats. I don't care how much euro or dollars or whatever else that's worth because it's my unit of account. Unit of account, however, doesn't just have to be the way that you describe the value. It's also the way that you think about the value. So I live in a small village in Germany, not too far from the Czech border, and actually relatively close to the Polish border as well. I have clients in the UK who use pounds. I have clients in the US who use dollars. For those of you who aren't aware, Germany's on the euro, Czech uses the Czech crown, and Poland uses the zloty. So there are 3 currencies locally around me, and there's at least 2 more, which I deal with on a regular basis. The only stable thing, as far as currencies is concerned, in my head is Bitcoin. So I started thinking on a sats standard. I don't think about something costing, 20 euro, 50 euro, whatever those are worth. I think of something as costing 20k sats or 50k sats. So thousands of sats is kind of just how my brain goes to the value of things now. So I see things getting cheaper all the time. So, okay, that was it for what. What does it mean to live on a Bitcoin standard? It means to recognize Bitcoin as money. Money being a store of value, money being a medium of exchange, money being a unit of account. Why? Why do I live on a Bitcoin standard? Now I know what I do. Why do I do it? Why don't I just use those local currencies around me? Isn't it just easier? Not every shop takes Bitcoin, so why would I do this? There's several reasons. The first being, again, Bitcoin is a store of value. I don't want to see my value disappearing. I don't want to see the value of my money getting worth less and less. In 2014, I started doing spend and replace. So you've probably heard that as an idea before, that you don't want the total amount of your Bitcoin to go down because if you spend Bitcoin, you're potentially losing a lot of future value. If the value of Bitcoin, relative value compared to goods and services goes up a lot, then if you spend your Bitcoin, you've lost some Bitcoin, and that could be worth millions in the future. Think of Laszlo, who 14 years and half a month ago or so, spent 10,000 Bitcoin on 2 pizzas. That's terrible, isn't it? He lost 10,000 Bitcoin. Actually, kind of not. I should have switched to the slide earlier, but okay. Kind of not. Actually, opportunity cost. The opportunity cost of spending Bitcoin is identical to the opportunity cost of holding fiat that you could have exchanged for Bitcoin but didn't. And what I mean by that is, if you have enough money in your pocket for 2 pizzas right now, you could exchange it for Bitcoin, or you could buy 2 pizzas. Laszlo could have spent his 10,000 Bitcoin on 2 pizzas, or he could have spent $40 or whatever it would have cost for 2 pizzas where he lived at that time. Alternatively, he could have taken that $40 and not bought 2 pizzas. He could have got 10,000 Bitcoin from somebody else. I'm sure there would have been somebody who would have been willing to give him 10,000 Bitcoin for $40. That was when I decided spend and replace actually doesn't make a lot of sense. If you value Bitcoin more than fiat, why hold that fiat at all? You're only going to be exchanging it for Bitcoin later. Why not exchange it for Bitcoin now? Why not sell your fiat and exchange for Bitcoin now? So the moment I realized that, in 2017, I stopped holding fiat. I don't ever hold any significant amount of fiat. I only hold Bitcoin as my money. So that's why I do it. How? How do I use Bitcoin or how do I live on a Bitcoin standard? First, spending directly wherever possible. Now this is an interesting one. Spending directly is more or less, I try to get the world around me to accept Bitcoin. So I walk into shops and I say, will you take Bitcoin? They say no, and I say, okay, bye. And I leave. I don't offer them another alternative, because why would I? It's not in Bitcoin's interest, it's not in my interest that they know I'm willing to use something else. If I only give them the option of Bitcoin, then they'll think about it at least. Maybe a month later, I'll go back and I'll try it again. Hey, Will, can I buy this for Bitcoin? No? Okay, bye. And I'll do that until they accept it, or until they get sick of me and tell me to never come back, which doesn't happen too often, but it has happened. Interesting little anecdote here, by the way, for spending Bitcoin directly. High-end restaurants are far more likely to say yes than anywhere else, because high-end restaurants make so much money off one customer. The loss of one customer is a big deal to a high-end restaurant. So if you want to go out for a fancy meal, go out on a date with your girlfriend or wife or whatever the case may be, husband for you ladies, boyfriend, whatever, call up a high-end restaurant and tell them you'd like to book a table. You're looking at a 3-course meal, sounds lovely, and then drop on them that you want to pay with Bitcoin. You're actually quite likely to get a yes. I'd say 20% of the time that I've tried that, I've got a yes from places which didn't accept Bitcoin before. So that's always good. But obviously, not everywhere allows you to spend Bitcoin directly. Not everywhere accepts Bitcoin, and you can't always be such an asshole to go in and keep on asking people over and over. The practical considerations are there. The real world exists, unfortunately. So, of course, there are companies who are making it easier. I do have to spend just a moment shilling a company which I'm spending most of my daily work time for, a company called Musket. Musket make a payment terminal, currently UK only, but the idea is that it's a single terminal which accepts both cards and Bitcoin, which makes it way easier for merchants to be able to just say, how are you paying today, card or Bitcoin, and select it and just either tap the card, scan the QR code, whatever the case may be. So an all-in-one device for both fiat and Bitcoin acceptance. Also looking at things like online acceptance as well at Musket. So that's spending directly. Like I said, there are practical considerations. Not sure how I am for time now, because now it's flashing 0, but I didn't actually see any numbers going down, so something's going on with the screen, but I'll be finishing pretty soon. So the practical considerations around spending Bitcoin, really, you do have to occasionally do other things. So there are places which will never accept Bitcoin. So think about things like fiat as a medium of exchange. So if I have to pay something in fiat. I have no choice. Good example right now would be my electricity bill. My electricity provider doesn't take Bitcoin. There's no way I can call up this big electricity provider in the place I live and say, hey, take Bitcoin from me, because they won't. So what I do is I will buy just enough fiat just before the payment is supposed to come out of my bank. So my bank, I do have a bank account. It sits on zero. And just before the payment is going to come out, I buy just enough fiat to make that payment. So I'm using fiat as a medium of exchange, but not as my unit of account or store of value. Aside from things like that, of course, there are plenty of services out there which are really helpful. I have a credit card, which I got when I lived in Australia. It's an American Express card, perfectly normal American Express card, nothing special about it. But Australia has this service called Living Room with Satoshi. I'm wearing their t-shirt at the moment. They sent it to me because apparently I'm a good customer. So Living Room with Satoshi lets you pay any Australian bill, including credit cards, using Bitcoin, including lightning payments. So literally this morning, before I came over here from the hotel, I paid off my credit card from the last few days of expenses using Bitcoin in a matter of seconds. Obviously that only works if you have Australian bills to pay. Canada has a similar system called Bills, spelt with a Y. I don't know it very well, but it exists. There are some great peer-to-peer exchanges out there. If I were in a place, I was in downtown Sofia, and I needed to get my hands on some Bulgarian leva immediately, I could use one of these peer-to-peer systems like Peach or Vexel or Bisq, and make a local exchange with somebody, perhaps in person, or perhaps some kind of remote exchange. So there are a variety of interesting and useful services that make it easier, and I'd be happy to talk to anyone who comes up to me later about your own unique situation and how you can start to live on a Bitcoin standard. So thank you very much.
Just stay here a second, Ben,
Sure.
because we might have a few questions. And Anya, if you're in here hiding, can you go and get your mic on? There you are. Yes. Just go get your mic on at the back there. I have a selfish question to ask you.
Absolutely.
When you made that switch to just use Bitcoin and completely walk away from the fiat world,
yeah,
what change did that have in you, like psychologically, physiologically?
Yeah.
How do you explain that to people?
So yeah, that's actually a very good question, and I'd say it took time, because first it was a conscious decision. I'm going to do this thing, and it felt uncomfortable at first, but I kind of felt like I was doing the right thing, even though it was uncomfortable. And then it got easier, and then it got easier, and then I started seeing other changes in me. So I mentioned, for example, I started measuring things in sats rather than measuring in any other currency, which was a surprise to me. I didn't actually realize I was going to do that. It just happened. But beyond that, it also did things like shift my time preference quite a lot. So you hear quite a lot of people talking about high time preference, low time preference. The idea of low time preference being, valuing things more for the future and really thinking a lot more consciously about how you spend money. So it used to be, I'd be walking through town, years ago, I'd be walking through town and say, I feel like a cup of coffee. I'd just, sit down at the nearest cafe, order a coffee. And now I will actually ask myself, do I really want that coffee? Or is the value that I'm spending better to be saved? Sometimes the answer is I want that coffee, and that's perfectly fine. I think it's ridiculous to, live like a pauper only so that, at some theoretical future point you get to have a good life. You should always have a good life, but it makes you more conscious of those spending decisions. How much is it actually worth it? So sometimes I'll have the coffee, sometimes I'll say, no, I'd rather save it now.
Perfect answer. Well, thank you very much, Ben. Big round of applause for Ben for all of that information.